We are done for this panel discussion, which I hope you will see as we get into this is a conversation among friends and colleagues about issues that we know matter to all of us. My name is Brian Cook. I am a consultant and advisor for college and university leaders through my firm Design Futures, and also author of a book which just released called The Solution Trap, where I spend quite a bit of time helping us to understand what it means to really start with the problem to be solved, not to rush to a solution, which includes a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is when we think about the future of higher education and what this conversation means. We really do need to have a firm grasp on the issues and what we mean even when we say the future of higher education. So I know we're going to kind of get into some different aspects of this from our own work, but I think first we're going to do some quick introductions.
Hello everyone again. Jeffrey Roach, Senior Vice President of Healthcare at RisePoint and formerly led workforce development at Siemens. So happy to be here with all of you and happy to be obviously with this esteemed panel.
And hi everyone, I'm Kristen Hawk, CEO of the Business Higher Education Forum. We're a national coalition of college leaders, so community college through four-year institutions all across the country, as well as corporate leaders. We're working together to solve the very issues we're all here talking about. How do we better connect education to employment, and how do we make sure that business leaders and college leaders are working at the scale and pace needed in a rapidly changing economy? It's great to be here with all of you today.
And good afternoon, my name is Carlo Salerno. I am the Managing Director of the Education Portfolio at Burning Glass Institute. For those of you who do not know the Institute, we are a not-for-profit think and do tank. Approximately 60 researchers, mostly labor market economists and data scientists. But we work with large-scale data to better understand the bridges between education and the workforce. And like the rest of my panel, I'm excited to be here.
So one of the things that I certainly get into in the book, I know it's a very important issue, is really defining what we mean when we say the future of higher education. I sometimes say it's the futures of higher education because there are many different possibilities, but I know we've done a lot of thinking about stakeholders and kind of from the human side, who are we actually talking about? So I know probably we've done a lot of thinking around how we define that kind of relationship.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when I think about the future of higher ed, I think about four stakeholder groups. I think about students, I think about schools, I think about employers, and I think about policymakers. So let me maybe just take a second and give you a high-level sense of how we sort of think about where all four of these groups are going, because they're all traveling down the same road. You know, students today look different than they did when I was in college. For the first time ever, we have more non-traditional students than traditional students. That matters. That matters a lot because non-traditional students don't buy college on a 9-month cycle, and they don't think about applying for school in the autumn or next August. They look at their finances and they say, I need more training, and what kind of options are available to me, and how do I see what's out, and how do I find them? And so we know students shop differently today than they did even 10 years ago, and that matters because if we think about higher ed as this very consumer-driven sort of framework, we know that both schools and employers have to be far more responsive to what students need, and we know that consumer preferences are also getting much shorter. I have kids in college, and my children hate the fact that they have to buy things on Amazon and wait till tomorrow to get them, right? The mere fact that overnight delivery takes too long is insufferable to them. But the fact is it's a generational gap. It's true that increasingly we want things now. We want things in smaller bites. We want things more immediately. And so for many of us, whether we are adults in the workforce or traditional students, 3 years, 4 years, 6 years of education to get a payoff in the workforce feels like a very long time. And so that transitions us into when we think about institutions and employers, because again, institutions know they face a demographic cliff, right? We know that the 18 to 24-year-old population is shrinking. We know that for schools to survive, they need to spend more time focused on adult populations. And quite honestly, you cannot just flip a switch and turn college into teaching 18 to 24-year-olds to one that teaches 25 to 45-year-olds. They're different delivery models, they're different marketing models. It's a major pivot that higher ed has gradually learning how to manage and deal with. At the same time, employers are thinking about how do I bring these workers into the fold. At the Burning Glass Institute, we spend a lot of time thinking about this challenge of how do we align what is taught with what is taught. And so for a lot of these schools who have spent years thinking about where they recruit their students from and where they place their grads, for the first time ever, they're suddenly finding themselves struggling to really understand how do I deal with a smaller pool of enrollments and at the same time deliver something that's valuable, because college is still getting more expensive. College is still getting harder to get to. So as employers think about what they need and schools think about what they're trying to deliver, what we're seeing is a fundamental change in how higher education works with employers and students to create the kind of bridge between education and the workforce that we're seeing today. And then the last thing I'll say is just policymakers, right? Like ultimately at the end of the day, you know, the checks that states write for public higher education systems are large, but they are not infinite. Community colleges especially, again, you know, educate what 43-44% of the post-secondary education population. They also deal with the leanest budgets. They deal with the most structural constraints, and they are the ones that often face the most simple backlash when it comes to dealing with state subsidies and trying to find more dollars to educate and complete and recruit rather than less. And so how we solve that challenge is becoming critical, and what we see increasingly is community colleges within the larger post-secondary space really trying to understand how we sell our value proposition, how do we connect with employers to make sure we're delivering value, how do we recruit the right students to do all of this, and how do we find the dollars to do all of these things that all of these people are expecting from us. So lots of insurmountable challenges, lots of very surmountable challenges. I think that's what we want to talk about.
Yeah, so, you know, from a healthcare perspective, I'll just say, and let me say, I think there's no better space than healthcare. So I know when we talk about the technician economy, I still believe healthcare is the best place to be. The biggest challenges we have are extremely real. And when we talk about the future of higher ed, we have to acknowledge them. So, I mean, you've got 70,000 roughly every year. Number continues to go up. Trying to get into nursing, can't get into nursing because they're on the waiting list to get into college. You got 25,000 roughly trying to get into imaging that can't get into imaging because of waiting lists. Now we all know no college wants to put anybody on a waiting list. So why are those waiting lists there, right? It's we don't have enough faculty. We've got a faculty shortage, massive levels in higher education. We also know that traditionally the faculty are not paid enough as compared to what they would make in industry. So you've got that element that's true. You have the clinical placement crisis that surely exists in all aspects, excuse me, of healthcare. You have the preceptorship challenge where we don't have enough preceptors willing to actually train our future healthcare professionals. And so you have all these issues that are extremely real. And what it comes down to is you've got to have industry who wants to really be the strategic co-architect to walk alongside higher education to fix it. So if I think about even the example this morning that was shared around, you know, the Carolyn Clinic, you hear how much they are as an employer leading the way, bringing those, you know, ecosystem partners together. That's really what has to happen. I think I regularly say, as somebody who spent more time on industry than in higher education, that both of us have been guilty of kind of playing in our silos for way too long. And we actually have to find the way it is to actually embed what each of us do in each other's work. And so when I talk about being a strategic co-architect, it actually goes so far as what Brian and I were talking about last night. I mean, so much of the challenge in higher education is actually so much of the challenge in healthcare. We've got governance challenges that are extremely real. We've got leadership challenges that are extremely real. But ultimately, when you go to a healthcare system and you say to them, well, how do you help to hire the faculty at that college? Most of the time they'll say, well, you know, that's not really my role. It is your role. Because the healthcare systems that have helped to hire faculty in joint faculty appointments have actually helped sustain a better preceptor solution and a better support for their future workforce. So instead of just looking at it as a transactional relationship where they do a clinical placement at that facility, you actually have to view it as that's my future workforce. You know, I was talking recently to the executive leadership at Select Medical, who we have the privilege of working very closely with. And they view, and they've done it beautifully, they view every clinical placement as a job interview to their future clinician at Select Medical. And so they get it, but the challenge they have is they have 4,000 CNAs, PCTs, student nurses every year. They pay for those student nurses, CNAs, to become RNs, but they're only completing from working adult CNA to an RN at 27% retention at America's community colleges. Now, why is that the issue? It's not the community college's fault. It's because the whole system has not built a solution to support that learner who's also working, who's a parent, who has some transportation issues, who may have all these different elements, which is why we have to look at this as a full ecosystem as compared to the silos that we still look at.
I keep wanting to pull the overview up. I keep wanting to pull the mic and then remembering I have that up there. Yeah, and I would just echo, I think two things that are important are what we're really talking about are mindset shifts. And that's what you can just describe some really good examples of. I think the companies and the leaders in industry that are most thoughtfully investing in their workforce for the future are thinking about early talent, not as cheap labor that is coming into our organization that in a recessionary cycle will be the first thing, right, that we cut or where we pull back, but rather thinking about in an AI-enabled economy, those are our future leaders. And we need to be thinking about how we recruit, how we invest in learning and development, how we partner with our higher education or K-12 or workforce agency partners in thinking about how we prepare and source that talent differently. We can't just think in short-term cycles. So that means we need to be thinking about how we have visibility into the skills across our workforce. I thought the Donkey Kong example this morning was a really good one. So as you have someone who's climbing up on one ladder, if you didn't hear it, I was late, that climbing up on one ladder, right, with changes to industry and roles coming down at them like a barrel, AI jumping over to another ladder to think about how do companies, right, think about having visibility into how they can skill and reskill both in their own organization as well as in partnership with their education. So that's a really important, I think, corporate and industry and government mindset shift. On the higher education side, and again, when I say higher education, community college, regional public, and really when we talk about higher education, we're not talking about the top 100, right? We're talking about the majority of America goes to the school that's within 75 miles of where you live, that understands your community and your context. And that richness, right, and diversity of our higher education ecosystem is really a strength, right? That's why community colleges, despite the funding challenges and resource challenges that you point to, on all sorts of measures that I look at, are really leading the way in terms of how to connect the workforce and many regional publics as well, because they're rooted in those local communities. But then the mindset shift I think that's really important on the college leader side is there's a lot of reasons that it is hard to move quickly with agility. And they're real, right? Governance, funding models, accreditation. However, and we've got to continue to as leaders, move beyond that, look at the mechanisms and ways that we can partner with employers. We can use non-credit, credit as mechanisms. We can use industry credentials as tools that we embed in our curriculum, and work-based and experiential learning, right? But we've got to have a mindset shift around how do we move with agility
we also miss the shadows or the spots where we get sunlight at the moment. By that, what I mean is we spend a lot of time thinking today about, how does AI affect the way people learn in college? But I think what's fundamentally most exciting about AI is going to be how it actually levels how people buy college, get into college, and use that college to get to the workforce afterwards, right? Like, the neatest thing about AI is it's going to be an amazing leveler over the next decade in terms of helping people make sure that they understand how to apply for college. It will help people find financial aid in ways that they were never able to find financial aid before. It will make sure that they don't miss deadlines, because every single one of us who has worked in higher ed knows that if you miss an process, or if you miss a financial aid step in a financing process, you are going to end up with more debt. That is just simply how all of this works. And AI is going to remove a lot of the frictions around the mystery of buying college and paying for college, because it is going to suddenly give generations of people who don't have parents who went to college and strong networks who understand how college works access to a level of expertise that they never had. We are all going to have a French intern named Claude who can help us navigate and work our way around very complex things that we didn't have before. And that is going to change the way lots of people who never thought higher ed was going to be available to them, suddenly be available to them. But it's also going to extend into the workforce. Not only are they going to take those degrees, but they're going to figure out how to use those degrees. And AI is going to help them figure out where they can apply for jobs. It's going to help them not only complete their applications and resumes, it's going to apply for the job for them. For years, applicant tracking systems worked against people applying for jobs because the employers had the robots and humans didn't. And now people have AI, and now it's a robot versus robot battle, because the resumes that we are developing today are designed to gradually combat what applicant tracking systems do, which is filter for certain keywords and certain competencies. And so we're seeing massive leveling of not only how people get into college, how they get through college, but also how they get into the workforce. And today's AI is like video games in the early 1980s, right? Like, we are excited about technology, and we cannot possibly imagine how much more magical it's going to be 20 years from now. But that's where our AI is today, and it's going to get better and better. It's going to functionally change the way higher ed and the workforce integrates.
Yeah, 'cause I think it's, one of the things on the student success side, which is an issue I know we often think about, is, why do students leave college, whether they're traditional age students or adult students? And of course, tons of research written about this that largely comes down to the issue of inconsistency of the student experience. What I mean by that is that the student journey itself is just not always optimized for different types of learners. And so, one of the things that I know found a lot in prior institutions I worked for is that students leave for all kinds of reasons. It's not as if there's just one thing. But more often than not, it was that there was some gap in this process, whether it was, financial aid, right? It was something that the institution was just not set up to be responsive around, or, there was some, issue with my registration, or, oftentimes it's personal things. And I think it is kind of the challenge, or the problem that we solve is how do we create a seamless, as best we can, frictionless experience for students, recognizing that, to your point, they are coming at this with a consumer mindset. They need a consumer-grade experience that can help them get from start to finish within our institutions. That requires us to think a lot about the oftentimes very unexciting but important aspects of innovation, which is operational and kind of, just basic administrative innovation that still needs to work for us.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, it's such a really good point. I have often, found that, on the student experience side, particularly, healthcare programs generally perform less than other programs. And a lot of that is that we assume that the same type of approach that works in all the other areas works in healthcare. But the actual learner in healthcare is far different. What they're learning is incredibly different. Now, some of it is also just crazy. And I'll give you a direct example, right? I mean, how many of us have ever heard of all the math and science that a healthcare professional has to do? Yes, it's important, but why should you as a nurse and a student have to do statistics? Do you ever actually use statistics in nursing? Very rarely. When you do, you actually go to somebody to help you with statistics. So in a direct example, I know in Wisconsin, actually, the University of Wisconsin Health worked with their technical college and actually were able to get imaging during my time at Siemens. You know, we have accreditors in healthcare that are just plain broken. They don't know what they're even accrediting anymore. They're accrediting if we're in the 50s as compared to the 2026. And the fact of the matter is that the institutions are afraid of them because they know they hold accountability for whether that program remains alive or not. And so my message there is that employers and workforce leaders like all of us here have to come alongside higher ed and have to be willing to advocate with higher ed when we have accreditors being overreaching with their authority. And this is also a topic that we have to be clear on the policy side. So, you know, for example, I recently had this conversation with Secretary Mack. I know that higher ed, you know, we don't generally have as much we can do about permanent accreditors because they actually govern themselves. But there are levers that can be played even at the federal government level to make it hard for them to do certain things. And we actually have to start to really push those envelopes. Because I'll tell you, imaging, you heard it this morning in Virginia County Imaging Technologist meeting. I hate to say this because I hate to be honest about it, but in my work at Siemens, when you hear 900, the challenge to get to 900 really is because of the accreditor. The accreditor has made it next to near impossible to innovate around imaging education. And so I sat in the room with those accreditors. They're just not willing to be able to understand what the reality of patient care is today. I think they're well-meaning, they're just not understanding the realities.
I think though that's an important place though, where when we see the business or the employer community show up alongside the education and workforce community, change happens, right? Whether it's in Colorado around new pathways for behavioral health, and many other examples, right? That's where it does become really important to have an approach where you have employers, workforce leaders, government leaders, and educators on the same page, right? Looking at data around what do we need, where's the look in the system, and how do we work together to fix it. We have a few more minutes, and I'd encourage each of us to share some examples of, you know, what we're seeing that makes us hopeful about the future of higher education, you know, some specificity, and maybe some themes. And some of the things that I would share that I think are critical are around how we create systems that are skills forward, right? Not necessarily, you know, skills-based, meaning that it's degrees versus credentials versus, but that we're really thinking about how are we enabling, you know, a credential to be more than just the degree itself, but where we're rendering visible the skills within that, right? And that's not an either or. That's something that can stack over time, and where, you know, institutions keep designing for careers. You know, depending on which data source you lead, you'll have between, you know, 7 and 15 different careers or jobs over your lifetime, right? But what that means is we're going to be returning at various phases of our much longer lives for education, reskilling, and learning. And so we need to be thinking about skills forward approaches. The other place that's important for higher education innovation in the future is experiential. Brandon and Steve talked about this yesterday. We talked about it throughout, but you know, that needs to be a design principle and requirement of every experience, not just for those students who are well connected or have some social networks. You talk to degree, you know, that's the promise of AI. Yes, and we also need human connection and relationships, and people who can say, I saw that person do that, and I will recommend you for that role, and we need both of those things. And as early career on-ramps change, those experiences are authentic, and we need to focus on scaling. Apprenticeships are great, and internships are great, but we also need project-based embedded experiences that work for small and mid-sized employers. Think about how we
So I love the skills example because I will tell anybody who listens, nobody has a bachelor's degree in basketball, right? We don't hire basketball players because they have a credential in basketball. We hire them because they have skills. Skills matter. Credentials signal the kinds of skills that we have available to us, but ultimately what we care about is people doing things, right? And so we will increasingly see this movement towards a skills-based economy. We will see more skills-based education and training. This is happening. We've done some work in Illinois with the Illinois Community College Board to, again, try and really align programs, the community colleges across the state do to local workforce opportunities to specifically boost economic mobility. We know that that can happen. We know that the data exists to make, we can use a scalpel where we can use a hatchet. And we're getting better and better at this. Yes, I want healthcare. But I will say, we're just about finishing some work on what we call stranded talent amongst mid-career professionals. And in a report that we have coming out soon, we actually find that around 25% of mid-career professional workers experience stall. They stop seeing promotions, they stop seeing wage increases. And so as we sort of think about the fact of what a college education does, college education is not a golden ticket, it is a lottery ticket, right? It is a ticket that helps us buy access to labor markets. And even amongst college grads, we really need to think about where continuing education comes from. And so as we sort of think about the role of higher ed and the role of workers, you know, in the old days, colleges would sell you an education. Over time, is it's going to build this banking style relationship. And instead of seeking new enrollment pools, it's going to learn how to grow and expand its existing enrollment pools. And a lot of people today who even have traditional undergraduate degrees, I think are increasingly going to find themselves going back to the same schools that they went to over a much longer span and arc of their lives to get updated and continual education and we build our own skills.
Well, I definitely want to say that. But I would say, you know, where I'm most hopeful, and I think where my attention really is around the organizations themselves of colleges and universities. I think that there is a lot more attention in recent years to building internal capacity for innovation and change. I have spent a lot of time in colleges and universities, and they are hard places to work at and for. These are often very thankless jobs where there's just so much being demanded and not often the resources to expand, to really think about what it means for the average institution to be a great place to work, to come to work every day, excited about the mission and the work itself. And so I certainly do a lot of work in this area, but I'm very just encouraged by just seeing greater attention to the organization itself and what it means for the average, say, community college or four-year university to be a healthy, thriving organization that works well. You know, I think that comes in the flavor of, you know, greater focus on academic innovation or on more inclusive, co-creative type of design processes, that sort of thing. That, in my mind, is both, I think, a trend to look out for and an area we're hopeful.
So I've got 13 seconds. I would say the two things that have me hopeful from a healthcare perspective is I'm a big fan of the K through 12 career connected high school models across the country. Haven't been to many of them. Those are thrilled in 1 second. The other one obviously would be, you know, we need to see more degree apprenticeships. When we see healthcare systems and higher ed coming together to do that, while we have limits and challenges, you know, from accreditors and such, but when we do that, we're actually truly building a grow your own strategy, which to me is the ultimate, you know, role of higher education.
And last plug for those of you who are leading whether higher education organization or otherwise, Dr. Brian Fleming's new book, The Solution Trap, which just came out, is a really great practical guide for how to lead change at your organization. So check it out. Thank you.
Thank you all.